What I thought would be good to start this program is read my origin story from the book in audiobook version or video version, if you want to count that. So sit back, relax, and here we go. Discovering the language of music production. I sat at my music studio desk. It was my bedroom in my parents' house, but it was a studio nonetheless. The room was dark, like a cave. My parents called it the Bat Cave, because it would be where I would spend most of my days. In this cave, I was trying to discover the secrets of music production. On this day, my inspiration and motivation ran high. I'd heard music from the top modern hits, which were fresh in my head. I knew what I wanted to achieve, music that sounded as good as theirs. I thought to myself, how hard could it be? I was in that phase of my music production skills where I thought I knew way more than I actually did. I opened my digital audio workstation and started tapping away at the keyboard. Their synth sounded big. Let's add a bunch and see what happens. I tested different things for a few hours. Why wasn't my music sounding as good as theirs? I became obsessive, throwing myself into trial and error. I'd look at YouTube tutorials when I would try to find an answer, desperate attempts to find solutions. But every time, my trial and error would fall short. Soon enough, I came up with something that sounded like a track. I didn't mix it though. When I'd used mixing plugins in the past, my tracks sounded even worse than before, so I avoided them. I showed it to my family and friends. My mother loved it. My friends who wanted to be nice said they loved it too, but I could sense their indifference. Then, other friends gave me the harsh truth. I just wasn't there yet. The pain struck me right in the stomach. They were right. I secretly knew it, but I'd been in denial. When I compared my track to the professionals, mine didn't match their quality. A tidal wave of disappointment rushed through me, a mixture of embarrassment and self-hate because my skills weren't where I wanted them to be. Embarrassment turned to anger as I blamed the circumstances I found myself in. It was because I didn't have an in-person mentor. It was because I didn't have the fancy equipment. It was because I didn't have the right connections. It was because I didn't live in LA. If only they could see my potential. What I wanted was to know the secrets that the professionals knew. I wanted to be artistically fulfilled and create the best tracks I could. I wanted to make music that could stand the test of time. I wanted to impact the world with my music. I wanted people to associate their most incredible memories with my music, a soundtrack for their lives. But deep down, there were also darker parts of me too. I wanted the social approval, the status that comes with being able to make a track that is so impressive, people can't help but tell you. I was secretly insecure. My self-image was that of a top music producer, but the reality at the time was nothing like that. I had potential, but I was a lot more arrogant back then. If not outwardly, inwardly. I wanted to escape from how I felt, this conflict between who I was and what I believed I could become. The potential I knew I had and wished to fulfill in this lifetime, the feeling of time slipping away, everyone else getting ahead faster than me. My ego ran wild, primed for the taming. After this cocktail mix of emotions, I concluded that they knew something I didn't. They had skills I didn't have yet that I wanted access to. There was a gap between me and the top producers. I felt like I wasn't allowed access to these secrets, or at least it seemed. And that was what was holding me back from getting everything I wanted. That is what I needed to discover. I needed to find out what they were doing differently to me so I could reach the same results. I got more frantic. Maybe the answer is in a YouTube video I missed, a program I missed, a book I missed. That is it. More information from people who know what they are doing. However, most of the information I found from these resources was about mixing. Most of the information was also genre specific. So I started to think that mixing would solve all of my music production problems. That has to be it, because that is all anyone is ever talking about. No one is ever talking about arranging, so all of my problems are mixing problems. I tried out the mixing tactics I was learning. It still doesn't seem to be as good as the top tracks. What am I doing wrong? Round and round I would go, making minimal progress, but I didn't know what I didn't know. I felt lost. Around the same time, legendary music producer Rick Rubin had a podcast interview with Tim Ferriss. While listening to the podcast, one line grabbed my attention so much that I had to listen to it multiple times. It was like a lightning bolt through my body, an epiphany, a sense of hope. Here is the quote. "The only way to use the inspiration of other artists is to submerge yourself in the greatest works of all time, which is a great thing to do. If you listen to the greatest music ever made, that would be a better way to work through to find your own voice to matter today than to listen to what is on the radio and thinking, I want to compete with this. It is more stepping back and looking at a bigger picture than what's going on at the moment." Rick Rubin. I thought, I've already been analyzing tracks. I listen to music all the time. Perhaps I wasn't analyzing correctly. Maybe I should take Rick Rubin's advice seriously. I should start immersing myself in the great works of all time again. So that is what I did. I started listening to the great music of all time. I listened and began analyzing them. I looked for answers. I read the songs like a book. At first, I started writing essays containing information from what I had heard. School teaches you to do things like this. It was a habit, but I noticed that after completing each essay, I didn't remember any of it. I couldn't use any of the information in my tracks. Yet I persisted. I continued to immerse myself in the great music of all time. I analyzed relentlessly. Around the same time, I was reading non-fiction books from diverse fields of knowledge. That is where I started to open my mind to concepts outside of music. They helped me find the secret. I began to read books on how talent develops and the fastest way to master a skill. I read hundreds of books on various topics. These topics included psychology, business, history, sales, marketing, human nature, mastery, biographies, self-development, spirituality, language learning, and more. In my research, I stumbled upon an unlikely hero named Charlie Munger. He was a man in his 90s who had nothing to do with the music industry. Munger, instead, was a billionaire master of investing. Munger attributed much of his success to what he called mental models. With mental models, he claimed that you could see the world clearly and become wise. As I read his work, I was blown away by how this man thought about life. He said that within each primary discipline, there are a few big ideas you can apply to anything in life. Whether that is chemistry, economics, biology, physics, mathematics, statistics, engineering, psychology, human behavior, business, investing, systems, strategy, the list goes on. It all connects. You can use key concepts from any of these disciplines to view other disciplines through. For example, there is a mental model in economics known as the sunk cost fallacy. When you put time and money into something, you don't want to back out. You've already put too much into it. You can use this mental model to view any area of life. Through mental models, you can become a polymath by learning the key ideas from many fields of life. People have developed these ideas over thousands of years. Each mental model helps you to see life more clearly. I wondered if I could apply mental models to my music production, perhaps I could see it. I was also learning Spanish around the same time. Language learning systems use a very particular set of skills to make it easier. You start with pronunciation, then you move to words, grammar, and conversations. I also analyzed every book I read. At the end of each book, I would always pull out the key information I'd found from the books. These concepts and many more resulted in a perfect mix of ingredients. As I analyzed music through various mental models, I began to see music as a language. After completing a 500-word analysis essay on a piece of music I was analyzing, I always found around 5 to 10 music production techniques. When I located the techniques and pulled them out of the essay, I could then take action on them while I was creating music. One of the key concepts of talent growth I'd read about was chunking. Chunking is one of the fastest ways to learn a skill. Chunking is when you break a skill into parts so that you can learn each chunk more easily. When you put the chunks back together, the whole process becomes easier. I realized that the techniques I found in my essays were the chunks of music production. Techniques were building blocks I was discovering in the music I was analyzing. The essays then became irrelevant to my process. So, I removed the essays from the process to make analysis easier. Instead, I simplified the process and wrote down one technique at a time. This was chunking. So from then on, when I analyzed, I was listening out for one technique at a time. When I found it, I would write down what it was, why the producer used it, how to use it, and the reference track I found it in. I wasn't only learning what a producer had done, I was learning why they had done it. As I started analyzing this way, producing myself became much easier. I was starting to think like the professionals. I began to know what to do when I was creating. These building blocks would come up intuitively while I was creating. My intuition started to become that of a professional. That is because the building blocks I was now using were those I found from the great music of all time. I analyzed for a year and a half like this. One morning I woke up and it felt like clarity had been deposited into my brain. I had all core principles of arranging in my head in the exact order. I wrote the diagram down on paper in my notebook to see it. These were in every track I'd ever analyzed. The 10 core principles of arranging. Core structure principle, core harmonic structure principle, core rhythm principle, counter rhythm principle, spatial principle, foreground background principle, energy principle, call and response principle, repurposing principle, synergy principle. Creating became easier after chunking the skill and finding the core principles of arranging. My tracks were sounding like the top tracks in the world. My confidence grew. My speed of creating became faster than ever. Most importantly, I no longer had to think about the art of creating music. It simply happened. I then stumbled across stem files from some of the great producers of all time, such as Quincy Jones. Stem files are the individual tracks of entire arrangements in their final form. I used the same technique building block mindset and saw the stem files through the lenses of the core principles. I felt like I could finally see and know how Quincy Jones thought while creating. I knew why he made the moves he did. This skyrocketed my growth as a producer. I called this process stems thinking. It helped me learn how to layer arrangements like a top professional. I did come back to mixing and mastering. I developed a framework for that too, but that's a story for later in the book. Being an entrepreneur, I wanted to know whether this would work for others too. So I started a program version of this book called the Polymath Producer System. I showed a few music producers who were initially skeptical about it, but after using the Polymath Producer System, their results shocked me and them. They were saying things like, "I've learned more in 4 weeks than years prior. This should be in universities. This is genius. This turns music into a universal language. This is the secret sauce. You deconstructed music production. This information is priceless." I showed them the system you're about to learn in this book and it worked fast. Amazingly, they achieved this by simply listening to music with their headphones and using the system you're about to learn. It is that simple and fun. Anyone can do it. It only requires the right mindset. I realized that these producers had been experiencing the same problems I had in the past. This system solved those problems for me and them. That is when I knew the content in this book was bigger than just me. It had the power to change lives all around the world. I saw music production as a learnable language. With these building blocks, I could then create my own original sounds. My music became more unique and people no longer said, "You sound like this insert artist." They started saying, "Your music should be on the charts," and "This production is genius." When I work with artists, I can see the building blocks they desire and let my intuition create that sound with them. At first, I used my mind to analyze the greatest music of all time. This allowed my mind to stop overthinking by chunking the skill. The building blocks of the great producers of all time now are part of me. Then my mind relaxed, got out of the way, and I'd let my intuition come through while creating music, where genius resides. Then I would let my head come back in to refine what had come through my intuition. As Rick Rubin stated in that same Tim Ferriss interview, quote, "Try not to think too much. The job is more emotion and heart work than it is head work. The head comes in after to look at what the heart is presented and to organize it. But the initial inspiration comes from a different place, and it's not the head. Creating art is not an intellectual activity, it is more inspiration." Rick Rubin. The journey toward this moment came with spiritual growth. I'm not the same person as I was when I started. Yes, I still have the same goals as before. I'm still creating music that I aim to stand the test of time, but now I have more of a quiet confidence. The arrogance dissipated as the journey humbled me. The original desires I had are no longer charged with emotional intensity. I've done a lot of letting go and surrendering. I am at a point in my skill set where I can achieve whatever sound I want if I put my mind to it. That to me is priceless. The inner freedom, the knowing that my creativity is infinite. I'm ready to impact the world with my music, and I now have the system, the skills, and the confidence to do it. I've become a polymath producer. I had learned that the secret was there all along. To master the language of music production, analyzing the great music of all time was the way. After this journey, I placed the entire framework into the book you're about to read. I call it the Polymath Producer System. My mission with this book is to activate this genius within music producers just like you. I want to help your mind understand music production. Then you can let your heart come through while creating. Then create your own original sounds and make your own mark on the music industry. You will follow in the same path taken by some of the great polymath producers of all time, from classical composers like Beethoven all the way to modern day producers like Quincy Jones. Music production analysis was and is the way. What you're about to learn is the product of decades of work, thousands of hours analyzing thousands of tracks, thousands of hours behind the DAW experimenting with my findings, as well as thousands of hours putting this book together, refining the information to its most simple truths. You will get all my key findings within this book. So let's start with the foundations of it all. In this first part of the book, you will learn the polymath producer philosophy, the philosophy behind the language of music production. You will also learn the overview of the polymath producer system. This system will help you master the language of music production. Thank you for listening to my reading of the first story in this book. The next step is to do the action steps of this program. And then when you get results, when you start winning, I want you to share your wins with the community. Because when everyone starts sharing their wins with the community, then everyone else will see everyone else winning, and then everyone else can win together with you, and you can win with everyone else. And then everyone can win together. So everyone, share your wins with the community.